The moment the word wedding left Ronald D. Moore's mouth, the atmosphere around the interview shifted instantly. What had been a relaxed conversation about storytelling suddenly became something far more charged. Fans didn't need context, they didn't need confirmation, they only needed that single word. Within minutes, clips were circulating everywhere, stripped of nuance and loaded with speculation. What stunned people wasn't just what was said, but who said it. Ronald D. Moore is not known for careless remarks, especially when it comes to the private lives of his actors. As the longtime creative force behind Outlander, he has always been cautious, almost protective, about boundaries between fiction and reality. That reputation made the comment feel less like a slip and more like a disruption. The interview itself gave no warning. Moore was reflecting on the emotional journey of the series, speaking about bonds formed over years of intense collaboration. His tone was warm, nostalgic, even proud. Then came the word, casually placed, uncorrected, hanging in the air longer than anyone expected. Fans immediately began asking the same question. Why would he use a term so specific, so loaded, when discussing Heughan and Caitriona Balfe? This wasn't a fandom blog or a speculative headline, it was a seasoned producer speaking in public. To many, that alone gave the comment weight. The sensitivity surrounding Sam and Caitriona's relationship is well known. For years, every interaction between them has been analyzed, defended, denied, and reinterpreted. Both actors have repeatedly emphasized professionalism, respect, and clear boundaries. Any suggestion beyond that has always been treated as intrusive or inappropriate. That history is precisely why Moore's choice of language hits so hard. The fandom is conditioned to expect careful phrasing from everyone involved in the show. Interviews are usually sanitized, emotionally aware, and deliberate. A word like wedding feels almost radioactive in that context. Social media reacted instantly, but not uniformly. Some fans were convinced it was metaphorical, a creative way of describing the union between characters or the culmination of a shared journey. Others argued that metaphors don't happen by accident, especially from someone so media-savvy. The split in interpretation only intensified the noise. What added fuel to the fire was what didn't happen next. There was no immediate clarification, no quick correction, no follow-up statement walking the word back. The silence felt intentional to some, careless to others. In fandom culture, silence often becomes evidence rather than absence. Longtime viewers began revisiting Moore's past interviews, searching for patterns. He has often spoken poetically about the connection between his leads, describing it as rare, enduring, and foundational to the show's success. But he had never crossed into language that blurred personal and professional lines this sharply. That deviation stood out. The timing also raised eyebrows. With Outlander approaching its conclusion, emotions around the cast and their legacy are already heightened. Fans are more attentive, more protective, and more reactive than ever. Dropping a word like wedding into that environment was bound to cause chaos. For some, the shock wasn't excitement, but concern. They worried that careless speculation could reopen old wounds or place unwanted pressure on people who have consistently asked for privacy. The fandom's history is complicated, and moments like this expose just how fragile the balance is. Yet for others, the comment felt like a crack in a long sealed wall. A hint that something had been misunderstood all along, or that truths were being carefully navigated behind the scenes. Whether hopeful or skeptical, fans agreed on one thing. That word changed the conversation. By the end of the day, the original context of the interview barely mattered. The narrative had shifted entirely. One casual phrase had overshadowed hours of thoughtful discussion about storytelling and legacy. And the fandom was left holding a question that refused to settle. Was it simply an unfortunate metaphor, or a rare glimpse of something usually kept off limits? With no clarification and emotions running high, the comment lingered uncomfortably. Not as proof of anything concrete, but as a reminder of how powerful a single word can be when it lands in the wrong place. As the initial shock faded, a more analytical phase took over the fandom. Fans began replaying the clip in full, listening not just for the word itself but for tone, pacing, and intention. Context suddenly mattered again, and with it came a quieter but more intense debate. The question was no longer what was said, but why it was said that way. Some pointed out that Ronald D has always spoken about Outlander in symbolic language. He often frames long-term collaboration as a kind of commitment, one that requires trust, sacrifice, and endurance. In that interpretation, wedding could have been shorthand for a creative union rather than a literal statement. For supporters of this view, the outrage felt misplaced. Others weren't convinced. They argued that Moore understands his audience too well to be careless with language, especially around two actors whose personal lives have been relentlessly scrutinized. This wasn't a new fandom or a casual viewer base, it was one built on years of emotional investment. Using a word with such clear personal implications felt, to them, irresponsible at best. Attention quickly shifted to the aftermath, or lack of one. No clarification appeared on social media. No spokesperson stepped in to reframe the comment. That silence became its own narrative, interpreted in radically different ways depending on perspective. For skeptics, it was proof that nothing needed correcting, while for others, it was a deliberate avoidance of fueling speculation further. The conversation inevitably circled back to Heughan and Caitriona Balfe, though neither addressed the situation. Their continued silence felt consistent with past behavior, but in this context, it carried new weight. Fans debated whether saying nothing was an act of professionalism or quiet damage control. Either way, it reinforced how little access the public truly has. What became increasingly clear was how much meaning fans project onto fragments. A single word had opened years of unresolved speculation, emotional investment, and boundary confusion. The intensity of the reaction said as much about the fandom as it did about the comment itself. This wasn't just curiosity, it was attachment seeking resolution. Media outlets added another layer by amplifying the most sensational interpretations. Headlines stripped away nuance, presenting the word wedding as a revelation rather than a possibility. That framing widened the gap between careful analysis and emotional reaction. Once again, a complex situation was reduced to a clickable mystery. Behind the scenes, industry voices urged caution. Several commentators reminded audiences that long-running shows often blur emotional lines without crossing them. Creative language doesn't always translate cleanly into literal truth. In a culture driven by immediacy, that reminder struggled to gain traction. As days passed, the frenzy softened into something more reflective. Some fans admitted they didn't actually want an answer, because certainty might dismantle the story they had carried for years. Others expressed frustration at how easily speculation can overshadow respect. The fandom began to fracture along emotional lines rather than factual ones. What lingered most was discomfort. Not the thrilling kind fueled by gossip, but the uneasy awareness of how little separates storytelling from intrusion. Moore's comment had unintentionally exposed that tension, forcing fans to confront their own expectations. The boundary between caring deeply and knowing too much suddenly felt fragile. In the end, no confirmation emerged, and no denial followed. The word remained suspended, unresolved and heavy. Perhaps that was inevitable in a fandom shaped by longing, imagination, and restraint. The real takeaway wasn't whether the comment revealed a truth, but how quickly people wanted it to. Sometimes, the most revealing moments are not about secrets uncovered, but about reactions exposed. One word, spoken casually, had reignited a conversation that was never truly settled. And in that sense, the silence that followed spoke just as loudly as the word itself.